Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Rose Martin and we are right around the corner in Lynchburg with Leah Weiss, this beautiful setting, and we'll ask her about her home in a minute. Her debut novel, If the Creek Don't Rise, is set in Appalachia in the 1970s. There's a young girl, Sadie Blue, who gets married and 15 days later realizes maybe it wasn't the best idea. She married a bad boy and that doesn't turn out very well. It's a little Loretta Lynn ballad, a little moonshine, a little ginseng hunting, but a wonderful, tender story. Right off the bat, she's won the Indie Next Award and several other awards, and we're really pleased to welcome her right here to Right Around the Corner. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Rose. Happy to have you.
And it's wonderful to be here in your home. It's just so beautiful and comforting, and this beautiful artwork. What would you like to tell us about it?
Well, I'm blessed that my home is beautified very often by my son's art. Paul Clements is a sculptor. He began with glassworks and he now does wood, metal, lighting. So a lot of the pretty things that you see, he contributed to the house.
Well, what a wonderful gift, right? And
yes,
so
it is.
Having an artist in the family, I think all of your presents coming forward are pretty much taken care of.
Yes, you're right.
So growing up, you really don't have a background in Appalachian history, but you consider yourself a girl from the fields, like that girl that just kind of digs at you, to have that
Yes.
Appalachian folklore. What is that?
You know, it's interesting because a lot of people ask me, because the book was set in Appalachia, what my attraction or affinity was to it, and it was the character that took me there. My roots begin in eastern North Carolina, in the flatlands, in the tobacco country, but I've been here in Lynchburg for many, many years. So I think we tend to find ourselves ocean people, mountain people, prairie people. I'm definitely a mountain person, so my book set in Appalachia is a natural appeal for me. I'm very much attracted to that part of the world.
Well, and I think with your mom's story, that kind of tugs at your heartstrings and brought you to a place that, you know, that grit and that
Yes.
that sense of, I'm going to make this happen no matter where I am in life. And your mom was one of 15?
Yes, one of 15 children, born on a tobacco farm with no running water and no electricity. I mean, it's hard to put your mind around the daily jobs that they had to do in order to feed and clothe and do all the chores on the farm.
Kind of similar when we think about some of the hardships of we know about Appalachia and the
Yes.
culture, especially when your book is set in the 1970s
Yeah.
and prior to that. And we'll get to the book in just a couple of minutes. But I think that, you know, you did kind of have that yearning by telling your mom's story and wanting to share that, and then
Yeah, I
living it
think
up.
anytime someone is a hard worker, has a great work ethic, does the right things for the right reasons, that's very attractive to me. And Appalachia in general has always been an interesting pull, and it probably stems from the time when I was in high school and college in the 60s. That's the time when America first was fully aware of this plight of Appalachia. Both Presidents Kennedy and Johnson shone a light on them, and we would see them on the cover of Life magazine, on National Geographic, on our evening news. So I knew that, it was also the time, I think, with the Peace Corps and wanting to go in and offer a helping hand, and what they found was a very independent, very self-sufficient group of people, and that's what I tried to represent in the book.
And you do a beautiful job of that.
Thanks.
Do you remember the first time you kind of came across the people or the stories of Appalachia? How you felt?
I do.
about
I
it?
remember the cover of a Life magazine, and it was black and white, and they were sort of black and white, very thin, almost. When I say a ghostly quality, it could have also been the nature of the photography. But I knew I wanted to set the book in about that time, not only for the fact that America became aware of that time, but it was also the time when my teacher, who comes to the mountain, would have had a simpler job than they would today. I mean, I've been a school teacher, and for Kate Shaw to say, I want to teach to curiosity, is not something that would be a number one today. They would have to teach to the test. They would have to teach to a structure. So choosing a little simpler time, an easier time, helped me solve a lot of problems.
Well, and you think about going back to that time when you talked about in college, you you started out as a musician, and you're an accomplished pianist.
Yes.
Wonderful. And then you taught music for years, and then recently 25, 24 years in school and retired from that. So I think when we learn about Kate Shaw in your book, you were able to pull on a lot of educational background, weren't you?
Absolutely, absolutely. But all those things that you're mentioning too, Rose, I think help to make a better writer. I think often about the skills that I learned becoming a musician. When you take a large body of work and you break it down and you master it, so to speak. And the same way with my job as the executive assistant at Virginia Episcopal School. The days would come, you would break them down, you would have to get everything done. So breaking things down to complete a project, I've been well trained for that in a lot of ways.
You know what's interesting is that as a debut novel, I didn't hear the stories of, writing as a child and writing through high school and writing through college and teaching. You were music, and you were an educator, and you're raising a son who's an artist. And then how did the writing evolve?
I was in my 50s, and I was actually communicating with a friend, a lot of emails. We were doing a whole lot of spiritual searching, but he would note my humor and my way with words, and he commented and said, I think that you should try your hand at writing. He said, you really have a lovely way with words. And I always knew I had a lovely way with words. For example, if your daughter got married or your mother passed away, I may very well pen a letter to you that you would want to keep. I mean, it was really heartfelt, but that's a page and that's a moment and that's a tiny blip. I remember saying to him, and I wasn't trying to be sassy, but I said, well, does the world really need another book? And what I failed to understand then is we need another book, but it needs to be told in a unique way. There needs to be some originality to it. So what I did back in the age of 50s, back in around 2004, 2005, I began with some memoirs about my mother's life. And what was a true blessing was his inspiration to encourage me to write led me to then research a story that would have very quickly been lost because my mother had lung cancer and we did not know. So it was within a few months that she was too ill for us to continue for me to interview her. So those early memories that I was gathering and collecting for our family became even more precious. Some of those stories did get published, so I was obviously learning my craft, but it was very late in life, and I, thank goodness, did not read anything on the internet that said, if you haven't published by the time you're 40, you may as well give up, because I hadn't even
we're
started.
Glad you didn't read either.
Yeah, I hadn't even started until my 50s, and so and I wrote a novel that did not find a publisher. I wrote a lot of short stories that did get published, but this book was, when it was selected by an agent, I was 68 years old. So it was, and I was retiring from my job at VES and having plenty of time to dedicate to a new career. So it was really very wonderful timing.
And dreams do come true.
They do. They
dreams
absolutely
do come true.
do.
So writing letters is pretty much a lost art. I was fascinated when I read that about you, that you love to put pretty words on paper, and that people kept your letters and sometimes framed them just because they were so special and touched their heart. That's really heartwarming.
Well, it's good to know that you've got that ability to create a moment that is unforgettable to that person. And then you just have to do it hundreds of times.
Right, everyone wants a letter. Everyone wants a letter. Well, and I was also fascinated with the idea of writing prompts, that you actually entered writing contests and had a few words, and that what they do in schools, right, with getting children ready for the writing prompts, and so oftentimes they're like, oh, we don't like that, it's so artificial, but yet you did it and you won a contest. And that seems like a great way as a launching pad for a story.
It was really wonderful as an exercise for somebody working full time who didn't know the craft, who could pit my story against other stories and find out which one won. So I know when I decided to move away from the memoirs, I wrote maybe a dozen stories around that I thought, well, I'll try my hand at fiction. And I was being facetious when I said, how hard can it be? Because every word is at your disposal, but obviously you need the right words to pull out. So I would look at the opening prompts. I would write my 1,500 word story in that month time. Mine didn't win, mine didn't win, mine didn't win. And what I would do when I studied the stories that did win was to find that the characters were deeper, richer, more vulnerable than the ones that I was creating creating, because remember, I cut my teeth on memoirs, and you tend to treat your family with great respect. You know, you don't delve very deeply, and you don't go into
that ugly stuff stays out.
That's right. Ugly stuff stays out. So I realized that I needed to create characters that had more grit to them. And so there was a little short story called Crossing the Line that began with the opening of this book called I Struggle to My Feet. And when I typed I Struggle to My Feet on my monitor, Sadie Blue came to my mind, a young girl that was in trouble. And then the sentence went on to I struggle to my feet, I lift my chin, straighten my back, and he hits me again. And it was like, oh, I mean, there was a huge amount of story in that opening line.
In just those few words.
Including a lot of hope. You know, I immediately wondered, and this often happens for, I think, all writers. I write that and I wonder what she did. I mean, you just are curious what this girl did. And that was my first win in 2011. I got a $150 check.
Yay!
And so the story sat there, a sense of accomplishment that I had pitted myself against hundreds of other stories and had written one that obviously moved to the head of the line. It was a year or two later that a friend sent me a copy of Olive Kitteridge. She happened to live next door to Liz Strout. And when I read the book, it was my first time, and I was at that time intensely reading to learn lessons, to learn writing lessons. And I was just intrigued with this character who was really kind of diabolical and not a pretty character at all, but you couldn't turn away. So that was, in my book, there are a couple of characters, Gladys Hicks and Prudence Perkins, who are very much modeled after an Olive Kitteridge. And it was after that that I began to germinate with the idea to take that short story, that 5-page short story that had a beginning and had an end to my story, and then to write 300 more pages in between.
And so you filled in the middle. Yeah. When do you write? What's your process like?
You know, this particular book was an obsessive, insane time where it just took over my life. I worked, I would come home, I would work deep into the night, and within a year from having thought and started, I had a pretty good working manuscript. Working on another piece, I'm trying to do around 10 pages a week, 1,000 words, a day, to try to keep myself going. And now it's moving along at a self-propelled pace, but that's another story. So
do you kind of focus yourself in the chair to write for a certain amount of time as if you're going to work?
Well, I know when the first book, because of the format and because of the story that gave me a framework for it, it was a little different than starting from scratch. So starting from scratch now, I literally did for a while try to write 1,000 words a day, and that sometimes might include my grocery list.
Right.
In other words, I'm just trying to write 1,000 words to prime the pump. That's what I call it, priming the pump, because you're looking for characters that will step forward and say, I want to tell the story. So when you find them, which I have now found them for another book, the fun begins.
So what I found really interesting is that you took a different take on a chapter layout by taking each character and you led us through their lives and led us through their thinking, so that then as a reader we were able to put the pieces of the story together. Does that come from the short story background also?
I think it does, because one of the problems I had as a young writer was point of view. And what I mean by point of view is if you're telling a short story, you obviously want to keep it tightly in one point of view. And so I would tend to jump, head hop, and was criticized at a critique group that I belonged to. They said, I'm really into this person's thoughts, and all of a sudden you've moved over to someone else's point of view. And I realized that was not a good thing. So what you find in this book is that each chapter, being first person, present tense, is intensely that person's private thoughts and feelings in a series of circumstances that overlap in this community. I love the fact that the publisher says that really the primary character in the book is the community of Baines Creek. You know, so all of these characters are pointing to the life and the lifeblood of this community, and a lot of problems, you know, that are going on in there, as well as a lot of funny, you know, fun things.
But you also did something else really cool, and that was using the Appalachian dialect.
Yes.
And full disclosure, I'm from Cleveland. I did not know what a poke was. So I'm reading, and I've got to go back and really concentrate. But, you know, my co-producer, Carolyn, she's reading it also, and she breezed right through it, remembers and was a part of that culture. So it was really interesting for me to chat about the book and to go back and try to figure out, like, the word won't, you know, in not the way that you think you're going to use it. So how did you become such an expert at that dialect?
You know, it was a challenge, and I can't say that I am an expert, because I had some specific goals. I knew, first of all, these were Appalachian characters. So to have them speak correctly or King's English every step of the way would not have been legitimate. But to also have it slurred in such a way that it was difficult to follow their storyline would have been defeating my purpose as well. So I was creating kind of a neutral, middle of the road that would have gonna, wanna, you drop an of and put an ah there, you know, a cup of water. And so I can remember when the book was going to go to the copyright editor, I had a little bit of panic, because I said to, and my Sourcebooks Landmark is my publisher outside of Chicago, and I thought, they don't know Southern, what are they going to do to my words? They were so respectful, because they could see the validity that I had created a language that was that you could follow, and that wasn't speaking down to anyone, and they had me put together a cheat sheet, and they protected those words, and they were very, very good about
Well, and
that.
I got that same thing. It was really authentic. It wasn't disparaging at all, but I felt like I was right in Baines Creek. And the way that the different characters were speaking, or the way they were interacting with each other.
Yes.
And your use of analogies throughout was wonderful too, because some of them I honestly had never heard before.
Yeah.
But I love the way you wove in the title of the book.
Thank you.
Also through there. So.
That was one of the last things, because my working title of the book had been either Sadie Blue or Baines Creek or The Bones of Baines Creek, and the publisher said we need a different title. And the date came when they said, the headline of the email said, we have the title, and I'm panicking, because some of the earlier ones that they had suggested just didn't resonate well with me. And they went through talking really about the fact that Baines Creek was the primary character, and it was the sense of the community. So when they shared the title with me, I was thrilled. Now, at that point, it had not appeared in the book. So I had to go back, and it was in the Maris story, that it was very easy when they were leaving, and they were caught in a flood, and she was upset as a child, and her mother was comforting her, that I could put that language in. But an interesting thing about the title, I think all of us tend to think that it's a Southern title that's been around forever. Well, I was at a book event months ago, and someone said, you know, that is a military statement made in Alabama in 1750, and it was referring to the Creek Indians. So if you do it with, if the good Lord willing and the capital C and the creek don't rise, that's not only grammatically correct, but it certainly has a different connotation. I actually had one person ask me, is this about the Creek Indians? So that was an interesting thing too.
But you've also woven Native American culture in here with the Cherokees, I would love Birdie, love your character Birdie, and with everything with the crows and those stories that, again, it was authentic and it was real, that we got caught up with the characters. And where did that inspiration come from?
Well, the crows came from my sister, who's one of my favorite fans, who loves to hear me read. And she said to me when I had started the book, she said, I do hope you're going to include crows in your story. And I said, why? And she said, well, go look it up, go research it. So I went back and found out that they're extremely brilliant birds. I am sure everything that I mention in the book they could do, probably far beyond. So they became a great, red herring, something to sort of have you think, is that going to be the downfall of Roy Tupkin? These crows that are going to be helping Birdie, help solve this crime. So the crows were extraordinarily fun to put in there. Birdie is, I know the first book I wrote that did not find a publisher, and this book has, my books will probably always have that wise crone woman who brings great wisdom, but also humor and is a grounding to a story. And so Birdie could have been her own story, of course.
Yeah.
Just
Well, let's
wonderful.
talk about the book because it opens with Sadie, and share a bit about the story.
Well, the 5-page short story that won the contest did open with Sadie being in an abusive situation and being pregnant, and at the end finding a way to get out of it. But of course, it had to be lickety-split. So creating a community was a real joyful thing because I knew that it needed to have a balance, a little bit like when you go to a buffet. You know, if you had all sweets or if you had all fatty foods, you know, it's certainly not going to appeal to you. But in my case, I was creating the sweet preacher, you know, who was a insecure, small, short-statured man with a heart of gold, contrasted with his really, really stickler, you know, uptight sister who was just so, had such a nasty vein in her. To Sadie Blue's grandmother, Gladys Hicks, who had such a rough life on her own that she said, Sadie's not going to listen to me. You know, she's going to have to learn it the hard way. But contrasted with that was a very sweet aunt who, you know, so it was creating this balance of hard, soft, sweet, sour, you know, that went through the book. So that sort of governed, you know, who got to play, because there were certainly people that tried out for the book that didn't get.
Well, and you created a family in your
Yes.
community.
Yes.
So each one of them had a really important role in not only Sadie but in their own lives and how they wove through.
And for me personally, to create Eli Perkins, who is the preacher who went off the mountain in order to be educated, and the teacher Kate Shaw, who comes to the mountain, they had this wonderful intelligent sparring that went on that was a great relief for me, the writer, because to stay in the dialect, to stay in with the people, it was nice to have a little bit of relief for that. And so
there's a little potential going on there too. We picked up on just a little bit of maybe something.
Well, I think that Eli's in love with her because she is a like soul and a like mind, and they're enjoy. She probably even gets his jokes. I don't know about that, but Eli, by the way, is the only character in the book who's based on anyone I know. Everyone else was fully fabricated, and at my age, that could be fabricated literally from all the people you meet in your life. But Eli was modeled after my Uncle Willis Wilson, who was a Baptist minister for 50 years. And Uncle Willis was a fabulous jokester as well. He told joke after joke after joke. So I knew that my preacher was going to have to bring humor. I mean, I could have put so many different kinds of preachers on this mountaintop, but I chose a straightforward preacher with, again, a heart of gold and great wishes for his flock that he was taking care of, but his funny humor that was forever popping out.
And it's in the book. And why don't you share something with us?
I would love to. I'd like to read an interesting little passage that was the very last words added in the book. The book was close to having the advanced readers' copies go out to help build the buzz about it. And the publisher contacted me and said, Leah, I'm still not 100% sure how Sadie Blue ended up married to Roy Tupkin. And I realized I had
And I'm not sure about that either.
I skirted around the issue a little bit because I thought she's young, she's naive, he's paying her attention, and there's sex involved. So how hard is that to figure out where she might end up? So I said to Shana, let me go ask Sadie Blue, you know, what happened. And so I'm going to read you just 2 short pages that is in the early part of the book, but I think it's important to note these were the very last words that almost didn't make it into the book. So this is Sadie Blue's voice. In the heart of the summer heat, it was going on day 26 since Roy been by. I was pining and not eating, wanting to up and die from the want of him, when his truck showed up in front of the house. He hit his horn for me to come outside, and I run to him. Without a hello or howdy do, he said, "Get in." And I did, but I had to move tools to the floor so I had room to sit. Billy went with him this time, and I was glad. Roy drove a short piece down the road, pulled into the woods, and turned off the motor. I let him have his way with me because it won't nothing new. It was over quick, and after, with the truck windows down and the smell of wildflowers on the air and his wide hand on my white belly growing big, that teeny foot kicked my innards for the first time and made Roy and me jump. Right then, with that one baby kick, that man with a dark soul grinned, and it turned his face into something beautiful I'd never seen before. A light shined in his face on this cloudy day and wiped away shadows that lived behind his eyes. I brushed back the dark hair on his forehead and kissed it tender over and over, 'cause Roy let me. He looked up and said, "Let's get hitched." I pulled back to see if he was fooling, and he looked different enough, so I fell into his arms. I was a fool hanging hope on a weak man I thought would stand tall if we got married. That Thursday afternoon in late August, with soggy clouds squatting in the hollers, we drove the truck down the long, winding mountain through countryside I'd never seen before or since. We crossed the county line, past the cutoff to Burnsville, into the town Roy said was called Spruce Pine, with stores lining the main street on both sides and the North Toe River flowing by like a wide creek. We found a justice of the peace by a sign in his yard, who answered the door with a napkin tucked in his collar, us interrupting his supper of liver and onions from the smell of it. I wore an off-white dress with a coffee stain on it from breakfast and a tear from getting caught in brambles. Roy wore a t-shirt and a tight grin. After we said a quick I do and Roy paid him $2, we bought nabs and Coca-Colas at the filling station when Roy got gas, then drove back home in the dusky quiet, not saying a word, shocked to see our names tied together on a legal piece of paper. Back at Granny's, Roy waited in the truck looking straight ahead. I rushed inside to pack a cardboard box of my things, handshaking, part of me scared Roy was going to drive off and leave me. When I called out to Granny I was married legal and leaving, she don't even come out of her bedroom to say goodbye or fare thee well. 15 days has gone by since that piece of paper got signed. Roy beats on me pretty regular 'cause nobody stops him. I thought we got married for a minor reason. I thought I was special to him. I must have made it all up, because none of it's true. Breaks your heart, and I'm just so grateful for those words to be in there. When I typed that she had to move the tools to the floor to have room to sit, I'm crying. I mean, the fact that this young girl couldn't even see that this was a man who had no connection to anything that involved her except, an immediate satisfaction.
Sure. Well, and you had mentioned being grateful for this. We're grateful for you.
Thank
and
you.
grateful
Thank you.
to be able to learn about you and for you to share this debut novel that we wish you all the success with, because I think it's just going to go places, and it touched our hearts.
Thank you.
So thank you. It's been a delight, and thank you for having us here in your home.
You are so welcome. It's been a pleasure.
So special thanks to Leah Weiss for sharing her book, If the Creek Don't Rise, with us. If you'd like to know more about Leah or more of our conversation, check us out online, because there's going to be a lot more to come. Thank you so much for joining us, and tell your friends all about us. I'm Rose Martin, and I'll see you next time, right around the corner.
Production funding for Right Around the Corner provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Anne Ray Foundation, and by viewers like you. Thank you.